So my name is Ashley Baez, and I'm a team leader for the Restorative Justice team. And I currently live in LA and reside right here next to USC in like Exposition community.
My name is Joanna. My pronouns are she, her. I live around Mid City, and uh, for like my education, I'm about to start my freshman year of college.
Hi, my name is Sadia. I am the AmeriCorps member here leading the Restorative Justice team with changes. A little bit about me. I just graduated last year at UCI, and I actually majored in criminology, law and society, and urban studies. And going to start hopefully my master's in urban planning this coming up fall at GW. So I will be joining you in DC soon.
I'm Seema Gajwani. I live in Washington, D.C., and I've been here for 20 years, and I currently run the Restorative Justice Program at the D.C. Office of the Attorney General.
First question would be, we want to know more about yourself and the type of work that you do at DC, or like how you came up to doing like your restorative justice idea.
Sure, great. Well, I actually am relatively new to restorative justice compared to a lot of people who have been doing it for their whole careers. And restorative justice, to be sure, is something that has roots that go back for, millennia, and its roots are in indigenous cultures in the Americas, in West Africa, in New Zealand, in the Maori culture, and and elsewhere. As you know, the concept of restorative justice is actually quite simple. It's how to resolve conflict among human beings who have to live in community, and it's not something we've invented. It's something that we're kind of reaching back and pulling forward because our current justice system has its roots in real brutality and state violence, and we're seeing the effects of that on people who are tangled up in the justice system and the damage it causes them and their families and communities, in hopes of securing justice for victims who are also not served well by our current justice system. Restorative justice is almost always something that is done and held by community. And that's where my program really deviates. What we've done is we've taken this concept that is, traditionally been community-based, and we've brought it not only into the justice system, but we've put it in a prosecutor's office, which is in many ways like heretic to a lot of restorative justice followers and practitioners, and I understand why. But what I was trying to do when I came to this office, which is an office that does the prosecution of juvenile crime in Washington, D.C., was not to come and do a restorative justice program. At the time when I started, I really didn't know much about restorative justice. I came to this office to see if we could change the culture of prosecution in an effort to transform a justice system. And, I tried with my colleagues in leadership in this new administration to change culture in more kind of traditional ways through trainings and bringing community to prosecutors, bringing prosecutors to community, and changing performance evaluation metrics, and all these different things that we were kind of had like dreamed up as these are going to be the tools with which we're going to change how prosecutors act and behave, and even how they see the world. And none of those things worked. And then through the course of my work, I stumbled upon restorative justice because I was working in a high school in DC through my job. And that high school had a new principal that had come in from Oakland, who had been the principal in Oakland of a restorative justice school. And she was trying to bring restorative justice to the school, and she invited me to participate and learn and be a part of the trainings. And that's when I started to imagine what it would look like if our prosecutors had to grapple with restorative justice every day.
How do you think it impacts? How do you think working with the youth in a restorative justice system really impacts them compared to like just without treating them with the restorative justice policy.
What you'll find in the data across thousands of samples, and this data comes out of the Department of Justice, is that young people who enter the justice system compared to their peers who kept out of the system have worse life outcomes in various different ways. So they have higher rates of committing more crime or recidivism in the juvenile justice system. They're more likely to get involved in the adult criminal justice system as a defendant, but they're also more likely to not graduate from high school. They're more likely to be suspended or expelled. They are less likely to get married. They are less likely to find gainful employment. They are more likely to engage in risky sexual behavior and self-harm. They are more likely to struggle with mental health later on. So in all these aspects of a child's life, a person's life, we are limiting the way that they can thrive in the future by something we're doing in our justice system. And that should be a huge alarm to everybody who works in and around the justice system. And somehow we've known this and it's not an alarm. And, I believe that part of what is happening is that there is a stigmatizing role that the justice system plays. It stigmatizes young people. It criminalizes them. It changes their own self-image at a critical point when they're just building an identity of who they are. And they're figuring out, what it means to interact with the world, how they should be treated, who they are, what they're capable of, and what people think of them. And when you put a kid in an orange jumpsuit and you wrap shackles around their waist and their ankles and their wrists, and you put them in a courtroom and you completely silence them, you disempower them in every way. When they've done something wrong, which all of us have done, you are really diminishing them in ways that have, I think, lifelong consequences. And restorative justice, by keeping them out of the justice system, is like leagues better. And some of the things that restorative justice really believes in, and I think are a counter to how our justice system works, is that fundamental is showing people and treating all people with dignity and compassion, giving people voice and agency, allowing people to hold themselves accountable in a way that sees them as somebody who's made a mistake, done something bad, but not is a bad person. And that is a way to grow and to become a better person, as opposed to shaming and stigmatizing and criminalizing somebody. And so what I think restorative justice offers young people, at least in the context of my work, is an opportunity to get out of a terrible and brutal justice system, and a way in which we can counter the stigmatizing and shaming way that we treat young people in the justice system.
Can you explain to us a little bit what it looks like in real life? An example generally of how this is different than a student or a person who commits a crime, maybe it's a violent crime, versus the traditional route. How does it look in real life in comparison, RJ, versus the regular process?
And so one case that we recently had was a young man who committed an armed carjacking. And the woman who was carjacked, I don't remember if she was a student. She was a student getting her PhD at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And I'm not sure if she might have been driving. I'm not sure about the circumstances of where she was. Anyway, a gun was held to her head by a couple of kids. They demanded that she give her keys. She handed over her keys. This particular woman wasn't hurt, thank God, but she was totally traumatized. She handed over her keys. The kids jumped in the car. They don't know how to drive. They smashed the car into something, shortly thereafter, the car was totaled. But what we do in our office is we highly incentivize restorative justice. And the incentive for us is, if a young person successfully completes restorative justice, then their case will ultimately be dismissed. And if they don't, they go through traditional prosecution. They will likely end up with a conviction, which will look like a juvenile conviction, to a felony that can impact them for the rest of their lives. So if they were to pick up a charge as an adult and they have a juvenile felony, as an adult, that would make them ineligible for any diversion program. So there are long-term impacts to having a felony conviction as a juvenile. And so because it's so incentivized, the lawyers and the parents are usually like, you have to do this to the young person. And we talk to them, make sure that they're going to be able to talk about what they did, that they're not going to, if they're like, I didn't even do it, I want to go to trial, we're like, great, that's what the justice system is for. We're not going to pursue restorative justice. But then we work with them if they are willing to take responsibility, which most of them are, interestingly to me. And we work with both sides. And then at some point we bring both sides together with their family and supporters. So this woman brought her boyfriend. This young man actually has a really troubled home life, and he ended up bringing a mentor and somebody from his school who he called mom, but neither of his parents attended the meeting. And they all had a 2 to 3 hour long conversation about what happened, how everyone was impacted, and what needs to happen to make things right. And then our facilitator monitored what happened after for about a year, because he had to do certain things. One of the things that she asked him to do was to keep in touch with her. And for I think the last year they've been writing letters to each other, which is, interesting. And I think actually kind of sweet. And then, he was successful at restorative justice. His case was dismissed. This happened about a year ago, but the restorative justice conference only happened a few months ago. And I just happened to talk to her yesterday. And before I talked to her, I went into the system to check if he's been rearrested or if everything was okay, and he hasn't. He's done fine.
Besides, of course, the judicial process with restorative justice, did you or do you currently have any personal experience or knowledge of restorative justice, of what restorative justice looks like outside of the judicial process?
The school that I know of, where I've talked to some folks who really have seen a transformation in the school, that was a relatively small school. It was a charter school here in DC, a public charter school. And in that school, over the course, it took about 3 or 4 years, but over the course of those years, they went from having dozens of suspensions and expulsions every quarter to having between 1 and 5 suspensions over the whole year. So the disciplinary mechanisms were so powerfully effective that they didn't need to resort to things like suspensions and expulsions that, maybe feel good at the moment when you have somebody acting really badly, but long-term really doesn't make sense to kick a kid out of school, out of a community. And so there is this disciplinary way that you use restorative justice. And so if a school, just like a justice system, can handle conflict or crime in a way that is less punitive and more rehabilitative and more restorative, then that's a huge win.
So before you said that there's a lot of carjacking in DC, and I just wanted to ask, how would you explain to a person why restorative justice is like a better route, even though that is a huge problem?
It's getting harder and harder because there is a lot of anxiety in the city around carjackings. We live in a city, there's always kind of a level of crime that people know exists and is upsetting. But right now there's this spotlight on carjackings and young people that is kind of really fueling a lot of social media attention and media attention. It's becoming more and more the case that people are less willing to give kids in DC, especially kids who are committing kind of serious offenses, a chance. And that's unfortunate. But even before this kind of uptick in carjackings, it is a challenge to convince somebody who's been harmed to, go the restorative justice path compared to the more traditional path, which most people think involves somebody getting locked up in jail and a sentence. Although it doesn't quite work like that in DC with our juvenile justice system. Like there's so many ways that people are impacted by crime, and those don't always come out in the trial process where somebody takes a plea and they get a sentence and people move on. And so when you say to somebody who's been harmed, like, it sounds like you have a lot to say, or that you have a lot of questions, or you really want to talk about, how badly this hurt you to the person and their family and their parents. Would you like that opportunity? Sometimes they're like, yeah, I'm really angry and I'm not sure that I'm ready to forgive this person. But I would like to talk to them. I would like to have my questions answered. And what's really interesting about that is I've read a little bit of like research on trauma, and to ask questions and have them answered is an important part of processing something that's traumatic and moving forward. And so I often find with restorative justice cases that victims feel really like relieved when they get an answer, even if the answer is not a really good answer. Sometimes they'll be like, why did you all of a sudden do this to me? And the kid will be like, well, I was having a really bad day and I hadn't eaten breakfast, and then I got yelled at school and kicked out of school, and then my girlfriend, da 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 da, and I was in such a bad mood, and then I just came across you and you stepped in front of me in a way that I thought was really disrespectful, and I just punched you. And it's a terrible excuse for why you can't punch somebody just for, it doesn't matter what you've been through, you can't do that. And yet a victim of crime will be like, oh, okay, all right, I get it. And it's apparently part of like how your mind works. If this happened to you at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday on the metro platform, and this thing came out of nowhere and it was not what you expected, your brain might be like, is this going to happen to me on a Wednesday at 3 o'clock? Is it going to happen to me at 5 o'clock, on a Tuesday? Is it going to happen to me on a Monday too? Like there's no like explanation. And that's why your mind needs answers. And if you have this kind of set of things that resulted in this, somehow it makes it feel like, oh, okay, well, that was because of this unique circumstance. And then your brain actually moves the trauma from the front to a memory. Not that it didn't happen and not that it was impactful, but it allows you to move forward in a positive way after you have that kind of closure. But the justice system doesn't give you that. And so a lot of people come to find, after lots of conversations with a restorative justice facilitator, that there are things that they can get out of the process.
How do you initiate conversation in building that trust? And does it take a long time? It sounds like it takes a long time.
Our justice system is created and kind of based on mistrust. It is an adversarial system. What I wish existed more, and what I see with restorative justice, is a kind of common hope and trust. Hope in the future of a young person who's made a mistake, and belief that they can do better and they can grow, because all of us can and all of us make mistakes. And trust that they're doing the best they can, that this doesn't come out of nowhere, that there are circumstances in life that lead some people to harm others and harm themselves, that are in many ways beyond their control. And trust that like more experiences that are positive, that give dignity, the more those people are able to trust the world and then make better decisions. I always say when a new facilitator is hired, we're not pro young person and we're not pro victim, we're pro everyone. And that's true. It's not that we're neutral. Our facilitators are not neutral. And the facilitators I've hired who were social workers before, they find that very difficult, because social workers are trained to have like boundaries and distance. And we're like, oh, no, you're all in there with that person. And they are. And so when you build that trust, people are relying on the trust that you've built with them to pull them into something that's very scary, in the belief that you're going to make sure that they're going to be okay, and that at the end of it, they're going to get more out of it than they came with. And that usually happens. And it's a really amazing job to have as a result, right? You get to see connection and hope and compassion, even in the face of great harm. And when you do, it's like kind of shocking, it's beautiful and it's shocking. You can't believe that like this guy who was so angry and hurt, who was like robbed at gunpoint, had a gun put to his face, or, some awful thing, could give a hug to the kid who did that to them at the end of these like 3 hours. And yet, like, that keeps happening. Not always, but often it does. And you're like, wow, I can't believe that happened. That's why it's a great job.
And then, so what I'll say is, Seema, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you for
No, please. I mean, it's a real honor to get some of your kind of level in the system, doing like real change making work. And we're just, so grateful to have access to you and pick your brain and learn. It's not every day that we young people get a chance to like hear from people that are actually doing the work in our system. So we really appreciate it.
Of course.
Awesome.
Congratulations and good luck to you all. Saria, I can't wait to see you in DC one day. Joanna, good luck and